Hey everyone! Today I'm bringing you the ultimate tier list for obtaining shiny gold medals in Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. That's right, after nabbing all of the shiny gold medals for myself, I've categorized them all according to difficulty. Primarily, I used my own playtime to assign each level to a tier, although I did make some manual adjustments where I felt they were needed, and I awarded bonus points if I had to look up a video for guidance. Levels within tiers are somewhat ordered from easiest to hardest, but I didn't agonize over the exact rankings. Roughly speaking, we've got the easy tier, for any shiny golds that took under 15 minutes. Next is the normal tier, for 15 to 30 minutes. Then the hard tier, for 30 minutes up to an hour. Above that is the ultra tier, for anything over an hour. And finally, we have the top tier, where a single level will be awarded my crown for biggest pain in the butt shiny gold in the game. Are you ready to do this? Let's jump in! Starting us off, we have the Rocket Barrel levels. Those are Peaceful Pier, Mole Patrol, Crowded Cavern, Gear Getaway, and Hot Rocket. As long as you have each level somewhat memorized from playing through it normally, you're going to stand a good chance of getting a first try shiny gold. Next up, we're moving into some minecart levels, in particular, Grip and Trip, Bombs Away, and Prehistoric Path. These are mostly the same deal as the Rocket Barrel levels. As long as you have the level memorized, you're not going to have a problem. Coming up next is the Mole Train. This one has a forgiving time target and doesn't require much beyond hopping from mole to mole. Next easiest is Treacherous Track. No, this is not one of the easiest levels in the game, but by the time you learn the stage well enough to complete it normally, you just need to complete it a second time in time trial to grab the shiny gold. And next is another K level, Perilous Passage. I'd actually rank this one as one of the harder levels in the game. I'm looking at you, annoying electric bugs. But similar to levels so far, it progresses at a fixed speed, so once you can beat the level, there is no additional challenge for shiny gold. Let's keep the K levels going, this time with 5 Monkey Trial. Again, not an easy level, but it has many fixed speed elements that more or less dictate what time you will get. Heading into World 1, we've got Sunset Shore. This one is a pretty straightforward case of rolling straight through to the finish. Sticking with the silhouette theme, next we have Foggy Fumes. The platforming here is straightforward, and it only took a handful of tries to pull out the shiny gold, even with some mistakes. We're jumping into World 9 with Mischievous Moles. Part of this level is fixed speed minecarting. The rest of this level can be executed a bit sloppily, and you'll still be fast enough for shiny gold. Next is Wigglevine Wonders. Similar to Mischievous Moles, part of the level involves fixed speed movement, and the rest does not need to be optimized particularly well. Now we're back into World 9 with Robo Factory. Although this is a long level, the time target is very forgiving. My shiny gold was littered with mistakes, and I still had over 6 seconds to spare. Coming up next is the next level in World 9, Lava Wheel Volcano. This one only took me 5 minutes, although looking back, it was pretty well executed without much time to spare. Maybe this attempt was ahead of its time? Oh well, either way, I'm still giving Lava Wheel Volcano a spot on the easy tier. Jumping back into the K levels, we've got World 5's Blast and Bounce. Same deal as the others. Once you learn how to beat the level, there isn't a whole lot extra required for shiny gold. You can even take a moment to time your barrel shots. Next up is Temple Topple. All you've got to do here is hop on Rambi and blast through the level without any egregious slowdowns. And now we're headed back to World 9 with Spiky Surprise. I will admit, I got the shiny gold without any frames to spare, but at the same time, I made several mistakes on the attempt, meaning this deserves a spot on the easy tier. Moving on, we've got Crumble Canyon next on the list. We're definitely getting to the harder end of the easy tier, but seeing as how this level took me 10 minutes, I can't put it any higher on the pyramid. Next on the list is Music Madness. Although definitely not the easiest level, I was able to get shiny gold in under 15 minutes, and despite my run not looking optimal, I came in nearly 11 seconds under the shiny gold time. In other words, sloppy runs are fine for the shiny gold. Now we're featuring our next boss with Mango Ruby Run. I can't pinpoint the exact difficulty, just that it all came together for me in under 15 minutes, despite my run having room for improvement. Rickety Rails takes the next spot. Why does this minecart level rank as more difficult than many of the others? Simply because there is some non-minecart platforming, as well as a non-obvious shortcut that needs to be taken near the beginning of the level. Next up is Wonky Waterway. A bit of careful platforming is required, but this one is mostly straightforward. I finished it with a few seconds to spare. Heading back into the bosses, we've got World 3's Ruined Roost. You'll get shiny gold if you hit the boss with 6 consecutive bombs, and this happened for me just shy of the 15-minute mark. The last couple of easy tier slots will go to levels that actually took me over 15 minutes, but since they were both early levels, I'm manually shifting them down to the easy tier and claiming the excuse that I was still warming up to the game. First is Treetop Bop, and second is Jungle Hijinks. There you have it, 29 of the game's 79 shiny golds done, all slotting into our easy tier. Let's move on to the normal tier, consisting of shiny golds that took roughly between 15 and 30 minutes. Our first normal tier entry is World 6's Clifftop Climb. This level features some pretty straightforward vertical platforming, although it is important to memorize exactly when to shoot the barrels in the upper section of the stage. Moving on, we've got World 2's Blowhole Bound. Much of this level moves at a fixed speed, which often translates into easy tier, but in this case, there was just enough platforming off of the whale to make it slightly interesting. My next selection is Damp Dungeon. Visually, this is starting to look more difficult than many of the prior levels. Here, you need to get a feel for which moving platforms to land on and jump off from. We've got another boss next with World 7's Feather Fiend. This shiny gold is on the longer side, and unlike many of the other bosses, requires some RNG to come out on your side. Let's go back to World 9 with Tarball Fall. Here you will need to, dodge tarballs as they fall. If you can do that, while moving quickly, you're going to have a good shot at shiny gold. Our next entry in the normal tier is Mast Blast. This one isn't particularly hard, but there are a few elements that you need to work out the timing for if you're going to stand a good chance. Next up is Vine Valley. For much of the level, you advance with the flow of the vines, meaning you can't do much to speed things up. But there is this one spot where you can skip waiting for a vine. Jumping back to the K levels, we've now got Shifty Smashers. Although this is one of the easier K levels to beat normally, it can be tricky to move quickly enough through some of the initial moving blocks to set yourself up for a shiny gold time. Moving on, we've arrived at Tippy Shippy. Here, it'll help to memorize the patterns of some collapsing plank floors, and also to note that there is a bonus barrel that you can enter to save time. Handy Hazards is our next normal tier entry. The platforming here may take a little practice, and the shiny gold threshold isn't all that forgiving, but this is a very short level, which helps a lot. The midpoint on our list, aka spot number 40, goes to Crushin' Columns. And fittingly, everything about it feels very average. Moderate length, moderately difficult platforming, and a moderately challenging shiny gold target. If you wanted a very average shiny gold, Crushin' Columns is your level. Kicking off the upper half of the list is Sloppy Sands. For an early World 2 level, there is actually some fairly precise and well-planned platforming required to snag the shiny gold. Next we're headed to Smoky Peak. A difficult jump is required to get Rambi out of his box quickly. Beyond that, all the lava falls are one-hit kills, and so require a good sense of timing to get through unscathed. And now we head back to World 2 for Stormy Shore. This level has a bonus barrel that will save you some time, and some tricky platforming, especially when all the tentacles come into play. Some decent dodging is required to blast through quickly enough without taking enough hits to die. Stepping into World 3, we've got Itty Bitty Biters. On top of needing some well-planned platforming, this is also one of the few levels in the game that requires you to defeat enemy waves, 3 to be precise. Quickly dispatching waves of enemies is a skill rarely practiced when chasing shiny golds. Hopping over to World 8, we've got its first level, Furious Fire. The shiny golds are getting noticeably more difficult now, with this one requiring both tight platforming and very wise use of all the hits you can withstand in order to blow through the fireballs quickly. Revisiting the K levels, we've got World 2's Tumblin' Temple. The finish to this level isn't particularly difficult, but some really well-executed platforming is required earlier on if you want to maintain shiny gold pace. Next up is Wadey Way. This one can be almost nauseating at times, with lots of direction changes and awkward jumps into barrels. We're also getting into territory where winging your way through isn't going to work. This one needs some planning in advance. Now back to World 8 with a pair of adjacent levels, Bobbing Basalt and Moving Melters. What makes levels like these tricky are their moving platforms, opening and closing passages, and enemies that only periodically burst into your path. This all means that achieving consistency run to run is paramount, so the stage elements will be positioned similarly each time. Before you achieve that consistency, each attempt feels like a haphazard mess of rolls and jumps. Jumping back into the bosses, we've got World 2's boss, Pinchin' Pirates. This is actually a pretty easy boss, Why did it take me nearly half an hour to get shiny gold? Probably because I didn't realize at first that pounding the ground would flip the crabs over. Springy Spores is our next entry. Here you'll find some fairly tricky platforming from beginning to end, as well as another case of a bonus barrel saving you time. Even when you get to the end, you need a carefully planned sequence of bounces up the springy spores to reach the finish barrel. Jumping ahead a couple levels in World 5, we reach Muncher Marathon. It might feel like this one should be easy, given that you basically have to speedrun the level anyway to beat it normally, but don't be fooled. The shiny gold needs to be especially fast, with some very precise platforming at parts. And rounding out the normal tier, we have World 1's King of Kling. I'll be honest, this is the one level in this tier that took me well over half an hour. But being the second level in the game, I'm downshifting it to the normal tier, with my excuse being that I was still warming up. Alright, 53 shiny golds down, and 26 to go. We're going to be getting into the levels that make getting a full set of shiny golds a formidable challenge. Next up is our hard tier, roughly defined for levels that took me between 30 minutes and an hour to get shiny gold. What leads off the hard tier? We've got World 2's Cannon Cluster. This one doesn't give you a whole lot of time to spare. The main challenge is keeping Diddy alive while dodging multiple electric jellyfish and a few different sequences of cannonballs. Maybe I made this one more difficult than it needed to be, but regardless, it took me a solid half hour of attempts to complete it. Next up, we've got Long Shot Launch. There is one barrel shortcut that you need to figure out early on to really make the shiny gold plausible. And to be honest, I figured the shortcut out by accident. If you're not as lucky, it might take you considerably longer than half an hour. Once you've got the shortcut down, the rest of the level comes down to a lot of memorization and precise timing with the remaining barrels. Moving on, we're arriving at Precarious Plateau. This level does have some things working in its favor to make it shiny gold easier. In particular, its short length and a bit of forgiveness built into the time target. But that said, there are still enough jumps to memorize and execute that at least for me, this one cracked the half-hour mark. Jumping over to World 8, next up on the list is Roasting Rails. This one might come as a surprise, a minecart level making it into the hard tier. Really? Well, there is one big jump from cart to cart early on that bypasses some slow overhead grass. It can take a while to figure this out. And beyond that, there is still enough non-minecart platforming in this level, with some enemies that are tricky to dodge, that this one can easily eat up some time before putting it all together. Now we head back to World 6 with Boulder Roller. This one packs a serious challenge in terms of hit management. There are moving boulders everywhere, and you'll need to plan out which ones to dodge and which ones to take a hit and plow through. The boulders moving in from the background give a rare test of depth perception in a mostly 2D game. And hit management really becomes key in the home stretch, ensuring you can absorb enough hits to blaze through the tall skeleton enemy, as well as the upcoming big boulders. Our next featured level is World 7's Slammin' Steel. All of the slamming elements here require some practice to time correctly, and the purple electricity enemies can be tricky to dodge. You'll also need to work out when to absorb a hit versus skillfully dodging enemies. The crux of this level is really at the end though, the ascent up the vertical column to the finish barrel. You'll need to have this down to a fine science to climb quickly enough to avoid waiting, while also not getting slammed by any steel. We're jumping back into bosses now with World 6's Thugley's High Rise. This style of boss, the jump on their back while they're moving type, can be difficult enough on their own to aim and time everything correctly. This one though has the additional wrinkle of having to learn to land on the boss's backside after each hit. Otherwise, the boss will take extra time to do a 180-degree turn animation. But the biggest challenge comes in the third phase, and I had to look up other videos to figure this out. You can short-circuit one of the boss's fire attacks by leaping into it immediately as it comes out of his mouth. But this is harder to aim and time than it sounds. You'll need to execute this short-circuiting twice during the final phase if you want shiny gold. Next, we head back to World 9 with Gushing Geysers. The difficulty in this one comes from the geysers themselves. They alter your jumps and really provide a jumping mechanic that you otherwise haven't had any practice with in the game. Not only do you need to work out the fastest way through the level via geyser jumping, but many jumps are rather precise and difficult to avoid taking damage, especially when there are electric jellyfish around. The finishing sequence to the level involves multiple large geyser jumps. The geyser right by the finish barrel will almost always blast you too high, eating valuable time before you fall back down. Somehow though, on this attempt, I skipped straight across into the finish barrel without getting the extra height. Flutter Flyaway takes the next spot on our list. Visually speaking, this level is obvious hard tier material. The whole thing is a mess of chaotically moving platforms. some super precise platforming is required at the beginning to reach the first barrel with a cycle skip. But things don't get a whole lot easier. You need to have consistent timing and execution from run to run for platforms to remain in predictable positions for you. And this level offers enough chaos that you're probably not getting far without that predictability. But even with consistency, the execution required on this one can still be a major pain. Flutter Flyaway, you are hard tier material, and there is no convincing me otherwise. Moving on, our next challenger is Button Bash. What makes Button Bash so difficult? Well, it's the level's sheer length. To grab shiny gold here, you need over 2 minutes of nearly flawless execution, as there is very little forgiveness built into the target time. You've got a whole lot to commit to memory here. The jumps, the barrel fires, and the optimal strategy for dispatching the wave of bugs early in the level. But really, the length is what elevates Button Bash into the hard tier. Needing to play at a shiny gold level for over 2 minutes straight is similar to getting back-to-back shiny golds on 2 shorter levels. It's a lot to ask. We're on our way back to World 5 with Clingy Swingy. The fast-moving swingy nature of this level means you really need to double down on memorization, as often, you have very little time to react to visual cues for what's coming up next. On top of that, this level is full of big jumps and tricky platforming. You'll likely want to take multiple hits throughout, which requires some planning and careful execution. Clingy Swingy passes the visual test as well. In my opinion, this is pretty obvious hard tier material. The next competitor on our list is World 7's Switcheroo. The stage's gimmick is circular switches in the background. Simply having your body overlap one of these will switch whether the red or blue platforms are available in the level. This means your planning and jump execution is no longer limited to make it from platform A to B. In addition to making it from A to B, you also need to ensure that you either do or do not pass over a background switch. And then the finish to this level is a pain. As there is a heart available, you can take 4 hits on the home stretch, and you'll need to use them all wisely to blast all the way through quickly enough. And the platforming up to the finish barrel is very possible to mess up. For our next hard tier entry, we've got a sticky situation on our hands. This level calls on many of the things that make shiny golds difficult. For one, you've got situations requiring highly precise platforming. Also, you have loads of moving platforms that will absolutely punish you for a lack of consistency. You've got a couple of barrel skips that you need to figure out. And then, like many of the levels in the hard tier, you need to manage your hits well, using all of your available hearts to buy you some of your time back. All in all, it took me over 40 minutes to pull out a shiny gold here. Paying a visit back to World 8, our next level is Red Red Rising. This might seem like surprisingly high placement for a level that more or less progresses at a fixed speed. Well, for starters, and this isn't obvious, you need to backtrack to take the early level bonus barrel to save time. Aside from this, the name of the game here is optimization. The level doesn't actually advance at a fixed speed. You are in control of how quickly you advance from move to move, and control it you must. There really is very little room for error here. You need a clean, smooth, fast transition over to the vertical column and all the way up it, and hopefully, you'll be able to eke out a shiny gold. Now we're rewinding back to World 2 with Poppin' Planks. This one punches pretty hard for such an early game level. Its jumble of moving platforms call for a degree of consistency often not required until many of the later game levels. The whole thing is full of jumps as tough as any you'll find across the whole gauntlet of shiny golds. At 2 different points, you need to get a clean bird bounce to clear gaps that seem otherwise unclearable. Don't underestimate this one because it's the first level of World 2. It earns every bit of its spot as one of the more difficult, hard-tier shiny golds. What do we have next? Well, none other than Tiki Tong Terror, the final boss of the game. What makes this battle difficult? Well, first of all, before you can begin the battle, on each and every attempt, you need to complete 1 minute of pointless rocket barreling. And trust me, many careless deaths tend to pile up in this section. Once you reach the battle, you're largely at the mercy of the game's RNG. You need to land 4 attacks on the boss's hands, at least 2 of which require some precise timing, and then 3 attacks on the boss's head. But the boss has a range of moves, and often, it will burn a lot of time before opening itself to take damage. To get shiny gold here, you're going to have to play through the rocket barrel nonsense enough times until you get some good RNG, where the boss opens itself up to 7 nearly consecutive attacks. In what may surprise many, we're heading back to World 1 and staying there to complete the final 3 levels of the hard tier. Call me crazy, but I've got Crazy Cart up next in the hard tier. Yes, that Crazy Cart, the very first minecart level. How can I justify this when nearly all other minecart and rocket barrel levels were firmly in the easy tier? Well, for starters, there is some surprisingly precise platforming required to get to the minecart quickly in this level. But even if I did get to the minecart quickly, it seemed almost none of my attempts would maintain a shiny gold pace. I don't understand exactly what causes micro changes in speed while in the minecart, but what I do know is this seems to be the only minecart shiny gold requiring you to really get these micro adjustments in your favor. It took me a hair under an hour to finally get to the finish barrel quickly enough. Next up in World 1, we've got Canopy Cannons. So what's the justification for this one? Again, it's not that the level itself is hard, it's just that the shiny gold threshold is absurdly unforgiving. When I finally pulled this one off after nearly an hour of attempts, I had only 1/100th of a second to spare. And watching my replay, it looks like near perfection to me. I did look at videos of faster times and discovered that a few barrel skips were possible. Implement a couple of those and you suddenly have some much needed breathing room. But none of these barrel skips are particularly obvious, so without copying online videos, just grinding away at this one on your own, yes, it is highly difficult to get shiny gold. And for the king of the hard tier, we've got the boss of World 1, Mugly's Mound. Wait, hold on, am I serious? Does Mugly really deserve top spot in the hard tier? Well, this took 72 minutes, so it was actually slotted for the ultra tier, but I shifted it down. But I do believe it deserves a top spot in the hard tier. You've got to hit Mugly 9 times in about 30 seconds, making this battle a total whirlwind. How exactly do you accomplish this? Well, I sure couldn't figure it out. This was one of the few instances where I had to consult shiny gold videos online to learn the strategy. It's super not obvious, requiring the 3rd and 6th hits to occur so early in Mugly's trip across the screen that he cancels his trip and undergoes his phase transition on the spot. To hit Mugly so early, you'll want to stand inside of him and take damage to achieve a better angle, and then still, you need razor sharp timing, which most of the time, I was not able to pull off. No other move in any of the other boss shiny golds is nearly this fickle, in my experience. So yes, landing the whirlwind 9 hits in 30 seconds is a challenge worthy of sitting atop the hard tier. With the hard tier complete, we now have only 7 shiny golds remaining. How close of attention have you been paying? Can you think of what any of them are? Which one do you think will come out on top? Let's move into our ultra tier, roughly defined as shiny golds that took over an hour of playtime. Leading off the ultra tier, we're going to stick with World 1 and pay a visit to its K level, Platform Panic. Unlike many of the K levels from later in the game, Platform Panic does not advance at a fixed speed, meaning your time will be entirely dictated by your own moves. I had some doubt as to whether I wanted to keep this level in the ultra tier, but after rewatching it a few times, I really couldn't deny it. The whole level is full of precise bops and razor-thin margins for clearing enemies and spikes. There are a couple spots in this level that call for a degree of momentum management that I'm not sure is seen anywhere else across all of the shiny golds. And there are some spots where non-obvious roll versus jump decisions radically affect how you are set up down the line. You need to work these out through trial and error to determine how to keep your speed high. Diddy is unavailable, which reduces your margin for error. And perhaps worst of all, since platforms only appear at the last moment, you need to have the whole level fully committed to memory. No visual cues for jogging your memory. All of these factors considered, there is no denying that Platform Panic earns its spot in the Ultra tier. Next up, let's finish off the K levels. Yep, the hardest K level shiny gold is World 4's Jagged Jewels. If I was taking mirror mode difficulty into account as well, this level would top the whole pyramid. But we're only talking about shiny gold difficulty, so while Jagged Jewels doesn't top my list, it is still very hard. I don't really know what to say about this level that isn't obvious from watching it. The platforms and hazards are moving, a lot. Many jumps feature at least 3 different moving hazards that can damage you. So many shiny gold attempts derail into a frantic series of rolls and jumps, hoping that by some miracle, you reach the finished barrel before you and Diddy have lost all 4 of your hearts. This is perhaps the only shiny gold I got, where by the time I got it, I still did not have a repeatable strategy worked out that reached all the way until the end of the level. This is how hard it is to achieve consistency here. Our next spot in the Ultra tier goes to our sole remaining level from World 2, Title Terror. This level looks deceptively simple when watching a replay. What is it that gives Title Terror a spot on the Ultra tier? Well, first, it requires what, at least to me, was a very non-obvious move: crouching behind a tiny rock to avoid a wave. Once you've figured out this is possible and worked out how to get to the finish barrel quickly enough, this is still an execution nightmare. You need to play near perfectly from the 13 to the 35 second mark. Only if you're near perfect will you barely have enough time to crouch slide into position behind the tiny rock. Crouch sliding isn't a technique that you will otherwise practice, and it was difficult to land it in the perfect spot to avoid the wave. Once you manage this, there is no time for rest. You need to hop back up as early as possible in order to reach the finish area before the next wave hits you. Moving on, our next Ultra Tier level is World 7's Cog Jog. For many levels, you can more or less go with the flow and earn a shiny gold. Not the case with Cog Jog. There are multiple spots where you will want to fire barrels in unintended ways, attempting to land on moving cogs that can allow you to bypass other barrels. There is one particularly tricky shot where you will save substantial time by deflecting off a cog, which allows you to bypass a barrel and skip a moving platform. I could never consistently get this deflection. It would happen occasionally by luck, like on this run, and when it did, I would know shiny gold was within reach. But there was still an entire ending sequence standing between me and shiny gold, and devising a way through this was quite the task. If you go through as intended, you'll be much too slow. Instead, you need to roll, jump, and hover just so from cog to cog, skipping barrels, and arriving at the finish much earlier than you would otherwise. The third hardest shiny gold goes to World 5's Tippin' Totems. This is perhaps the only shiny gold in the game that I obtained several times, because, well, this level is fairly addicting. But I noticed something interesting. On many levels, once you get shiny gold, you know the strategy, and you know how to execute it, and you'll keep achieving shiny gold somewhat regularly if you keep playing. That wasn't so much the case here. Sure, I was trying to improve my time, and so was holding each run to a high standard, but the difficulty shone through, and really stopped me from ever becoming consistent at this level. It's one tough move after another without forgiveness. But the ending, as in everything after the checkpoint, is what takes the cake. It can't be practiced by resuming from the checkpoint, as the timing of moving elements will be different versus when you get there on a real attempt. After a dizzying sequence of jumps and bops, you'll finally arrive at the finish of the game's third hardest shiny gold. So what tops Tippin' Totems and claims the runner-up spot as the game's hardest shiny gold? Why, it's the game's final level, Golden Temple. This probably isn't a surprise if you're familiar with this level. It's an assortment of tiny fruits swaying in the sky that Donkey Kong must hop across without the help of Diddy. Sequencing the jumps from fruit to fruit is enough of a challenge, but you'll also face 4 purple bomb-throwing enemies that you need to ever so carefully slide under to avoid taking damage. If done right, you can plow through the 5th one for your only hit of the level. Despite feeling that I had sequenced everything optimally, I simply was not reaching the finish in time for shiny gold. It took a while, but finally I found the missing piece that made it all come together. I had to undercut this strawberry and jump straight to the half banana in order to reach the next banana sequence in time. All in all, devising my exact sequence of rolls and jumps and executing the whole thing took a solid 2 hours. I'd totally understand having this level at the very top of the list, but in my opinion, there is one single level that tops it. But first, if you're enjoying this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. It'll really help the channel out. The level that ranks as the absolute most difficult to score a shiny gold time is 9-5, Topsy Turvy. Yes, a few levels back from Golden Temple, we find the real shiny gold champion. So what makes this shiny gold so difficult? Well, it has moving platforms, requires narrow enemy dodges, precise platforming, extensive planning, and so on. But I've said that about many levels so far. Topsy Turvy took me 2 hours and 21 minutes, basically at least double that of any other level, Golden Temple excluded. So what is it actually that separates Topsy Turvy from the rest of the pack? Well, quite simply, it's the finish. Of all the shiny golds, no level requires a more bizarre and non-obvious strategy to grab shiny gold than the finish of Topsy Turvy. Exasperated at being nowhere close to shiny gold, I looked at other videos of this level for help, and I was shocked at what I found. The finishing sequence, which diverges substantially from the normal finishing sequence, is a 2-parter. First, you need to jump off a spinning piece of clingy grass and get substantial height to reach an upper ledge below the finish barrel. It took me a good 15 minutes of practice to even figure out how to replicate the substantial height on this jump. The trick is to jump when the platform is still spinning and before you let go of the cling button. But the second part is more difficult. You need to hover from the top of this grass wall over to the finish barrel's platform. What makes this difficult is the timing. Attempt this hover jump and you'll come up short. Okay, jump when the platform has just begun its clockwise rotation and you'll come up just a hair too low. The key to making this jump is to perform it the instant the platform starts rotating. So there you have it, 9-5, Topsy Turvy is a very difficult platforming level, followed by a totally non-obvious and outrageous 2-part trick to reach the finish barrel in shiny gold time. Let me know down in the comments below where you agree and disagree with my tiers. Which shiny golds have given you the most trouble? Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Bye for now.